I trusted them without hesitation, not because they promised anything, but because consistency had taught me to feel safe. For years, things had moved in a familiar rhythm, and I believed that rhythm included me. Trust doesn't come from words. It comes from repetition, from showing up, from being relied on quietly, day after day. And I never questioned my place, because nothing had ever suggested I needed to. I believed that trust meant permanence, that once you had earned a place, it didn't need to be defended. I listened, I supported, I stayed patient. I assumed loyalty worked both ways. What I didn't realize was that trust can make you comfortable, and comfort can make others forget to include you. Looking back, I see it clearly now. Trust didn't protect me from change. It only delayed my awareness of it. And sometimes, by the time you realize trust is no longer mutual, your place has already begun to shift. The first time it happened, I didn't react. I noticed it quietly, the way you notice a draft in a room you've sat in for years. Subtle, almost unimportant, yet impossible to ignore once felt. A conversation started without me. Not intentionally, not rudely. It simply moved forward, as if my presence wasn't required anymore. I told myself it was nothing, a moment, a misunderstanding. But that moment stayed with me longer than it should have. I replayed it later, not searching for blame, but for clarity. No one had looked my way. No one had paused to ask what I thought. And yet everyone seemed comfortable continuing without my voice. That was new. Not painful, just unfamiliar. Like realizing a chair you always used is no longer there, and no one thought to mention it. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't bring it up, because part of me believed inclusion didn't need to be requested. If I had to ask for it, then something had already changed. That was the first time I felt left out. Not pushed away, not rejected, just quietly unnecessary. And that realization settled in, gently but firmly, preparing me for what would come next. It started with small moments. Someone answered on my behalf, not incorrectly, just confidently. I already know what she thinks. She's fine with it. They said it casually, almost helpfully, and because the answer wasn't wrong, I stayed quiet. But something about it felt unsettling, like my voice was being replaced by assumptions. I noticed how naturally it happened. No one checked with me first. No one waited for confirmation. They spoke about me, not to me. And slowly, I realized that when others begin to speak for you, it's often because they've already decided you won't object, not because you agree, but because you've become predictable to them. I wondered when my silence had started sounding like permission. I wasn't absent, I was right there. Yet my role shifted from participant to reference, mentioned but not involved. That was the moment I understood. Losing your voice doesn't always happen when you're ignored. Sometimes it happens when people assume they no longer need to hear it. I began to notice it in the smallest ways. Meetings happened without checking if I would be there. Plans were made assuming I might not come, and that it wouldn't matter either way. No one said I wasn't needed. They just stopped waiting. And when something is no longer waited for, its importance quietly fades. There was a strange calm in realizing this. No confrontation, no explanation, just the quiet understanding that my presence had shifted from expected to optional. I could show up or not. The outcome would be the same. That realization didn't hurt immediately. It felt distant, almost unreal, but distance has a way of making truth clearer. I understood then that belonging isn't measured by invitation, it's measured by absence. When I wasn't missed, I finally saw where I stood. And instead of forcing my way back into relevance, I chose to observe the space I no longer filled. because when your presence becomes optional, choosing yourself becomes necessary. The silence wasn't sudden. It grew slowly, filling spaces where conversation used to live. Questions went unanswered longer than usual. Messages were read but not responded to. Important things were mentioned only after they had already happened. No one explained anything, and somehow, that explained everything. Silence has a way of speaking clearly when words are carefully avoided. I listened closely then, not to what was said, but to what wasn't. The lack of reassurance, the absence of curiosity about my thoughts. That silence wasn't empty, it was intentional. And once I understood that, I stopped waiting for clarity that would never be offered. I realized I didn't need a conversation to confirm what silence had already made clear. There was nothing left to discuss, only something to accept. Because when people choose silence instead of honesty, they've already made their decision. And in that quiet space, I finally heard the truth without a single word being spoken. At some point, I stopped being inside the story and became someone watching it unfold. Conversations happened in rooms I no longer entered. Decisions were made in tones I wasn't meant to hear. Life continued, smoothly, without adjusting for my absence. I was still there, but no longer involved. Watching from the outside gives you a strange clarity. You notice patterns you missed before. You see how easily roles can be reassigned. No one struggled with my absence. No one paused. Everything continued as if this version of the story had already been planned. And that realization didn't make me angry. It made me aware. I understood then that being on the outside isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's a perspective. From there, I could finally see what was happening, without emotion clouding my judgment. I wasn't excluded by accident. I was observing the result of a decision already made. There was a time when I would have confronted them, asked questions, demanded explanations. But by the time understanding arrived, confrontation felt unnecessary. I already knew what the answers would be. Carefully worded, incomplete, designed to protect comfort rather than truth. Understanding came quietly, without arguments or raised voices. I saw the choices they had made. I recognized the direction they were heading in, and I accepted that my role no longer fit into their version of the future. That acceptance didn't weaken me, it grounded me. Sometimes understanding doesn't need to be spoken out loud. Not every truth requires a reaction. Not every realization needs a response. By choosing understanding over confrontation, I protected my peace and allowed myself to move forward without carrying resentment. When everything became quiet around me, I expected to feel weak. I thought silence would make me smaller, less certain of myself. But something unexpected happened instead. In the absence of noise, I could finally hear my own thoughts. Without defending myself, without explaining, without reacting, I began to feel steady. Stillness gave me space. That space allowed strength to grow slowly, naturally, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the calm kind that doesn't need permission. I stopped measuring my value by how often I was included. I stopped waiting for validation from people who had already moved on. In stillness, I learned that strength doesn't always come from action. Sometimes it comes from restraint. I realized that staying still wasn't the same as staying stuck. I was choosing my moments carefully now, choosing where to invest my energy, choosing what deserved my voice. And in that quiet discipline, I became stronger than I had ever been, not because I fought to stay, but because I knew when to let go. People often expect anger when they realize they've been replaced. They expect bitterness, confrontation, a need to prove something. But I felt none of that. What I felt was clarity, calm, steady, undeniable. I finally understood what had happened, and understanding removed the need for reaction. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. Clarity changes the way you see everything. It strips away assumptions and leaves only truth behind. I saw their choices clearly now, not as personal attacks, but as reflections of their priorities. And I saw my own value separate from those choices. That separation was freeing. I didn't need to be louder. I didn't need to be seen. I only needed to be honest with myself.
When clarity replaces confusion, resentment loses its power. I stopped imagining conversations that would never happen. I stopped waiting for apologies that weren't coming. There was nothing left to settle, only something to release. Because when you understand the truth fully, revenge becomes unnecessary. Standing in my own space felt unfamiliar at first. I had spent so long adjusting myself to fit into places where I was slowly being removed. Now there was no one to adjust for. I wasn't waiting to be included. I wasn't hoping to be noticed. I was simply present on my own terms. This space wasn't loud or impressive. Didn't need to be. It was quiet, stable, and honest. A place where my voice belonged to me again. I carried forward what mattered. My values, my dignity, my self-respect, and left behind what no longer served me. For the first time, I didn't feel replaced. I felt grounded. I wasn't angry. I wasn't defeated. I was clear. Standing strong in my own space wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about finally choosing myself, without apology, without explanation, and without looking back.
Oh.